So yes, as Toby said, I'm finishing off a 3-part series on why church. And 2 weeks ago, Toby spoke about the church being both gathered here together and then scattered in where we are in our week. And then last week, Matt spoke about worship. So spoke about we worship us when we're gathered and when we're scattered. And when we worship, we're laying our crowns down at Jesus' feet. And today we're looking at how, as a church, we invite people into family. So obviously, if we're talking about family, to kick us off, here's my family tree. There is a point to this. Looks a bit like a nice scientific equation. So I'm H in red down the bottom there. And this is my family tree, the people who are alive. I've anonymized them just in case they're watching. My family don't really watch it, so but no, just in case. And then if we go to the next one, these are the people who currently, as we're speaking, live in a small town on the Isle of Wight. Yep, all of them. Josh was quite shocked when he first saw this, when he met my family, because if he did this one, it would be scattered over different countries rather than just in a small place. Just in case you don't know where that is, here's a couple of pictures. So we're Bristol, you should know where that is, that's where you are. And then the Isle of Wight is the arrow at the bottom there. And then if we zoom in, this is the Isle of Wight. That little circle, rectangle, that's where they all live. So we're talking a really, really small space. And so it kind of feels from that story that I must be like solid island stock, that my family are all island-based, and that must just be where I came from. But that is just not true. If we go back to the next one, go on to the next one, which is the family tree again. That arrow there, that's Big Nige, that's my granddad. He moved to he was born on the Isle of Wight, actually, but his family, and I can't remember if it was parents or grandparents, but his family moved there to be lighthouse keepers, and everyone else followed. So some people married in, some people were born on the island, but everyone moved off and came back. My other grandparents actually only moved there a year ago. So although it kind of looks like, oh, well, we've always been here forever, actually it started with one person drawing people in, drawing people in, drawing people in. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. We're looking at inviting people in ultimately to follow Jesus. But we're inviting people in the context of church, in the context of family. And to help us with that, we're going to dive into 2 readings, both from the Gospels, which are like the accounts of Jesus' life. And the first one we're going to look at is John 8, verse 12. And it says this: "When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.'" So at this point in John's account of Jesus' life, John is really showing us that Jesus is saying who he is. Jesus isn't holding back any punches here. He's not saying, "I'm quite a nice guy, maybe you should have a listen to what I'm saying," or "I've done quite a lot of study, I've got some ideas, would you like to hear them?" Jesus is saying, "I am the light of the world." He is declaring, I am God. I am Yahweh. That's the name that the Jewish people use for their one creator God. He is saying, I am the light to lead you out of the mess, out of the darkness. He is saying, I am the light of the world, the whole world, not just Galilee or Judea or the Middle East, the whole world. And this Jesus is inviting those people who are listening to him and us now to follow him as he lays down his life for us all, for the brokenness of this world, as was prophesied, as he would be the servant king. Follow him as he defeats death, the enemy, in rising again and bringing freedom to the captives. Follow him as he continues to make everything new, fixing the creation that was broken. And when we get to follow Jesus, we get to not just reluctantly say, oh, I guess his ideas are good. We don't just get a path to heaven or a guilt-free conscience. We get, as Jesus says, to never walk in darkness. Now, it doesn't mean not to suffer in this world, but it means we get to walk day by day with King Jesus in right relationship with God. We get the freedom to be who we are made to be in a world which is broken. We get to say no to an enemy. We get to join in with what Jesus is doing in this world, and we get to worship him as our King. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This is a life-changing message. It's the core of who we are as a church. It's a message that our vision is built around and brings ultimate freedom. It's a message that, as he claims that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, it's a message that we long for the people we love to get to know too. We long for the people of Bristol to experience the love of Jesus. Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Let's have a look at our next passage, which is from a different gospel, from Matthew chapter 5, and this is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Starting at verse 14, it says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So Jesus said in our last passage, "I am the light of the world." And then Jesus says here, "You are the light of the world." You, us, the church. Him, us? Can it be both? Well, when we say yes to Jesus, we get a new identity. The Apostle Paul says in his second letter to the Corinthians, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." And as part of that new identity, we get to live as light, as children of God, shining his hope to the world. Jesus came to be the light, to make and show us the way. And now he's called us to be light in the world. He has sent us to shine his light of hope and truth. Later in that passage, it says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." He calls us to shine the light he's given us, wherever you are, at work, at university, in your own family. Some won't notice the light. Others might find it tricky with the light. But others might see it and come to know the light for themselves. This isn't an easy task that Jesus has given us, but we don't have to do it alone. We don't have to do it as individuals in this world. In Matthew, Jesus says, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them." Not only is Jesus with us, but he is for us gathering. The Bible is so clear that God has designed us to do this faith journey in community. Paul, in his letters to all the churches in the New Testament, talks as if gathering in the name of Jesus is the way to do it. In Ephesians specifically, he says, "Speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body," that's us, the church, "the whole body is joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." And the writer of the letter to the Hebrews says, "Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family." Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. We are family. Those who follow Jesus don't do it alone. We do so collectively as brothers and sisters. Even at the Queen's funeral this week, the Dean of Westminster and Archbishop Justin Welby both referred to the Queen as our sister. Our identity as human beings is found in community. As Christians, we find our identity in Christ, in his new community. And therefore, our mission, our invitation, takes place through communities. Communities of light, light of the world. I don't know if any of you have been watching the new Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Josh and I are big Tolkien fans, and we swing constantly from, I love it, it's rubbish, that's weird, I don't know, I love it again, or continually. And we haven't watched this week's episode, so please don't ruin it. But in one of the episodes, there are the Hardfoots, and they were carrying lanterns, and one of the lanterns breaks, and it turns out that this lantern was actually made of lots and lots of fireflies. And as I was writing this talk, this came to me, because the idea is that the fireflies, when they scattered, each of their lights was the same, but when they were together, it actually made a light that you can follow. As cliche as this sounds, we're brighter together. Yeah, that's a bit cheesy, isn't it? But I do think it's true, however cheesy that is, that actually when we come together, our lights together shine brighter than when we're just individuals on our own. As a church, we get to be a people of the truth that invite others in to see it, experience it, know it for themselves. As a family, we get to say, come on in, experience our community that is like no other, and get to know this Jesus that binds us all together. It can be really powerful, but we know that church isn't always that simple. I think it's really easy to swing from kind of too far out of the church to too far into the church and back again. Sometimes it's really easy to swing away from the church. Maybe you attend one, you go to church, you like church, but when it comes to your friends getting to know the message of Jesus, frankly, I'm probably a bit better at doing that on my own, thank you very much. Sometimes people in church can be a little bit embarrassing, and I think, actually, this is better just on me. The church is optional, I'll do my chats at work. I was recently reading one of the highly recommended books on Alpha. It's called Cafe Theology. In this tome of a study, Michael Lloyd, highly esteemed principal at a theological college, writes on the subject of being ashamed of the church. And this is what he says. He says, it's easy to be. There are such pillocks and prats in the church that it's easy to be ashamed of one's brothers and sisters. But Jesus isn't, and so somehow we have to let the pilloctude bounce off us. Thanks, theological scholar. But I have definitely been in that boat before, forgetting that as Jesus came to build his church, he wants us to use the church. This isn't a solo activity. I used to be like this all the time. I used to not invite colleagues and friends along. I mean, I still probably am. I used to think that's not really for them. That's not going to work. I'll just rely on those questions they ask me in the office once every 3 to 4 weeks and those random chats we sometimes have and hope that the light of Jesus shines through me there. To my knowledge, no one that I've had those conversations with has actually got to know Jesus yet. On the other hand, it's quite easy to swing too far into the church. Perhaps we acknowledge that obviously Jesus wants us to bring more people in, that actually we want to be open to new people and all of those things. But we kind of convince ourselves that we need to be a little bit more sorted first. Once the rotas are full, once we've got a good system going, we can get some more people in. Once the family feels a bit more secure, then we can invite someone along. Maybe actually we need to invest with who we've got first. What if we change something for a newcomer and actually someone who is already here gets annoyed and leaves? Obviously, we are family, and we do need to love and care for each other. That's really important. We used to say at our old church that we had an amazing, great front door, but we also had a pretty big back one too. It's really important to look after each other, but we do need to be aware if our family becomes so inward-facing that we've forgotten that we are ever growing. Be aware that if we start preferring our own groups without other people in them, or be aware if we forget to invite other people along. But the best thing about church being family is that it's not family like my island family were. We're not just slowly trickling people in by the odd marriage and the odd birth and just becoming like one of us. No, we are a distinct, random, wonderful, but bonkers community. We're a community that perhaps is missing from this current world. As Toby said, Josh and I live out in Withywood, which is near Hartcliffe, and it's a community that I've never really experienced before in the sense of community, and maybe communities used to be like this, and I wasn't really alive when they were. But we have an amazing neighbour. I'll call him Barry. And Barry used to say hi all the time, introduced himself very quickly when we moved in, and every time we saw him, he was doing something. He was going to pick up bread for someone. He was giving someone a phone call, sat on the bus with him once because he was going up to the hospital to visit someone. He'd be doing all sorts of things. And every time I see him, even when I'm looking out the window, he's always chatting to someone in their front garden or chatting to someone as they're getting into their car. He knew everyone, always chatted to us. Funny side note, the other day he had to ask Josh's name because he just used to refer to him as Vicar. Brilliant. Maybe communities were like that before, but I think it's desperately needed. A community where we're not just self-reliant, where we're not self-reliant on ourselves, we're reliant on each other, where we can depend on other people, where we know we're accepted as we are, and where we all hold a core value. T.S. Eliot wrote a poem called Choruses from the Rock in 1934. Despite being nearly 100 years old, I think it resonates true today. Here are some of the lines from it. What life have you if you have not life together? There is no life that is not in community. And then he goes on to say, and now you live dispersed on ribbon roads, and no man knows or cares who is his neighbour, unless his neighbour makes too much disturbance, but all dash to and fro in motor cars, familiar with the roads and settled nowhere. I don't think God created humanity to live as we do, as individuals in an all-for-themselves society. But we get to invite people into something deeper, to something fuller, into family. And when they get here, maybe immediately or maybe gradually, they'll meet Jesus. Because you are the light of the world. Jesus has given us that assurance. He doesn't need us, but he graciously uses us. And it all starts with an invite. Because if we're honest, not many people are just going to walk into this community. Some might, but the vast majority will enter through an invite. I know a family in our church once who sent their kids along to our holiday club that we were running. And they loved it, and so after the holiday club, they started coming along to a messy church we ran once a week, which was mainly a lot of fun, and then a really short worship session, then we all ate together. And they did that for quite a long time. They weren't very engaged in the worship side of it, but they just their kids loved it, and they got to know people, and we got chatting, and they'd had quite a tricky life, but they were getting on with it. And then eventually, the mum started coming along to the morning service, and it was amazing. I saw her, I was so impressed. The kids went off to the kids' group, and then I was sat near the back with her. And the person leading the service decided it was a great time to do a prayer tunnel. I don't know if you've ever seen a prayer tunnel, but it's where you get everyone lined up either side, and people walk through and they get prayed for, and wacky stuff happens with the Holy Spirit. And I was just sat there going, oh my word, she's going to think this is mad. So I went to her and I was like, how you find this? She's like, it's really, really weird. I was like, great, she's never coming back. That's it. That one time she came. But she did. She came back again and again. And then I'm pretty sure we had to leave. We left the church at that point because we were going off to Josh's training. But from Facebook, I can see she carried on going to church and she knew the people. And I'm pretty sure she did Alpha, and she's still a part of that community. She'd had a tricky life to that point, and she'd found a love in Jesus and in the church that had transformed her. On Alpha, which you've heard about already, you have the absolute assurance that at this cheese, wine, and jazz night, we are not going to do a prayer tunnel. It is definitely, or anything equally bizarre as that, rest assured, it's a very safe invite. But I do think sometimes we view Alpha as a way for people to come along and hear the truth about Jesus, which it is. But it's not just that. Alpha is, in some ways, more than that. When you're inviting someone to Alpha, you're inviting them into a community. On Alpha, you join a small group. You get to eat with them. You get to chat with them. You see each other weekly. You go for a pint afterwards. Alpha doesn't just introduce them to the amazing truth of Jesus, even though that would be enough. It's more than that. You come into a community. You come into a family. Some people on Alpha may accept the truth of Jesus week 1. some week 6, some on the last week, some may reach the end of Alpha and not yet quite have met Jesus. But some people are still so hooked by community, they carry on anyway. They serve at one of the social action things we do. They try out a Sunday. They carry on meeting up with their Alpha group because they've been invited into a family, into a community, and gradually, continually, they eventually meet Jesus. Maybe an Alpha invite right now doesn't feel quite right for you, your colleague or your friend or your family, although I'm pretty convinced that most people would accept it, even if they say no thank you, but politely. But maybe it's not quite the right thing. But that doesn't mean you can't invite them into this family. Reflecting back on what I said earlier about the colleagues I had conversations with and never got to invite, I did actually invite one. And she came in to the community of church, and she did so by dressing up as a Who from Whoville from The Grinch and A Christmas Story. Not quite how you expect to join a church. But we were hosting this kind of Christmas production, which was like Grinch with a twist. And I was doing refreshments, and we were all dressing up as Who from Whoville to add to the kind of Christmas production. And I needed some more help. And I was like, it's sort of up her street. She quite likes production stuff. She's quite happy. We've had some loose conversations about church. She doesn't seem completely opposed. I reckon she'd be up for it. And so I invited her, and she was like, yeah, and she came along, and she got dressed up, and then she was part of the community of church, and she started coming along, and then she got to know Jesus, and from an invite to dress up as a Who on a Sunday for Christmas. And then recently we've seen her, and she has now adopted our now godchild as a single mum, because Jesus told her to, and has transformed that child's life from a simple dressing up as a Who. We've watched her go through that journey, which has not been simple, in the community of a church. And when things have gone wrong, the community have rallied round her. We are a family, and we get to invite people in, and it's a massive privilege. Who could you invite to something? Maybe if you are a parent of a 0 to 4, this one's slightly more for the morning, but you might know a parent as well. Parent of a 0 to 4, you can invite them to Little Nicks on a Monday morning. Maybe you could join one of our interest groups. I know we've got climbing and the cycling. I don't really know. We've got lots. They all constantly change. So if you have an interest, see if there's an interest group and see if there's someone you know who has that interest and bring them along. Invite them into community. Maybe you could volunteer for one of our social action hubs and find a friend who has that heart as well and invite them to come and join you. Maybe the Alpha launch event is the perfect thing to invite someone to that you know. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus has sent us to shine that light together and to invite people in to experience that light. Church is a community. It's a family, and it's an infectious family. Jesus designed it that way.